We're going to talk about landlording today. This is the third time that I've taught this course. And it hasn't changed. It hasn't been like a revolution. We haven't changed what we do in a big way, but we've evolved over the years. And we've evolved for a lot of reasons. When I first taught this course, I had 3 full-time employees. I had a full-time maintenance man, I had a full-time bookkeeper, and I had a full-time secretary. Because we had about 3 times as many properties as we have today. And of course, as you acquire a lot of properties, and we own apartment buildings, we own a bunch of condos, we own a bunch of different types of properties years ago. And when you have these different types of properties, they're a lot more difficult to manage. And over the years, I'd like to think we've become smarter. And part of that is changing the type of properties that we've owned. When I first started buying properties, I bought a lot of properties that I thought had a lot of cash flow. They were duplexes, they were apartment buildings, a lot of them were cheaper houses. I never did own a mobile home park or what do we call them, manufactured home? Yeah, they used to be trailers, but we call them something else now. But I've never, and that's not because I don't like them so much, is because in the town I live in, there just aren't any. I mean, you'd have to buy them in a rental park, and that doesn't make any sense to me. But I've owned a lot of lower end real estate. So I owned a lot of units. Well, what comes with a lot of units? A lot of tenants. A lot of tenants. So over the years, I've tried to become a little wiser and reduce the number of tenants we have. And so we've taken a lot of those lower end properties, all of them actually, and we've exchanged them. And this is not a class on exchanging, but if you don't know anything about 1031 exchanging, learn something about it, because we use Section 1031 to actually sell those properties and buy better properties. So today we own a lot fewer properties than we had before. The second time I taught this class, I had 2 employees. This time I'm teaching this class, I have no employees. We run the whole shop by ourselves. Now Valerie and I run it by ourselves. She handles a lot of she handles all the money, keep it clear. I don't get any money. But I handle all the people side of it. I rent houses up. If we have problems with a tenant, I take care of it. If there's any kind of maintenance issues, I take care of those. So I handle the phone. And because technology has evolved a little bit, anybody here have a fax machine now? When I first started, we didn't have a fax machine either. But they've come and gone, haven't they? I mean, we had a whole generation of technology has gone. So because technology has changed so much, and because we have cameras, and everybody's got a camera in their pocket and a phone in their pocket, and you don't need all this stuff sitting on the desk anymore, the way you manage has changed too. And I'm not on a cutting edge of technology, but I try to keep up with it as best I can, and that's why I teach classes and have younger friends, because I like to quiz them. I do have 3 kids. That helps some, doesn't it? Because they're into technology very much. So we've changed the way that we market houses. We've changed the way we communicate with our tenants, and we'll continue to change. Do you think technology will change again in the next 10 or 20 years? Yeah, I doubt we'll even recognize what we're doing today 20 years from now. So it's going to change again dramatically. So it's important, I think, kind of to stay up on this stuff. So it's good to come to a class on a regular basis, maybe every 5 or 10 years on a management, and figure out, what to do now. Do laws ever change? Yeah, and they may change dramatically. Okay, so one thing you want to be as a landlord in your town is sort of proactive politically. You want to make sure they don't change the laws that'll hurt you. Here in this area, they tried to change the law a couple years ago to require all landlords to register and pay a fee on every rental property. Well, that's not a good change for landlords, is it? And it's really not a good change for society, because in effect what that does is raise everybody's rent, doesn't it? Makes it more expensive to operate everything. So the people that really end up paying for that are the tenants, not the landlords. We're going to pass that stuff along. But as government, it spends more time. If you spend more time with government employees, how does that affect your profit? It doesn't help it any, does it? And it may drive you out of the business. Well, and if there's fewer people in the business, that's probably not good for society. So you need to be proactive, and you want to stay on top of law changes, but as you can, you want to try to influence, how they legislate new laws in your town, because you can change them. If you get 50 people down there in T-shirts, they'll probably vote your way. That's just, they count those T-shirts. I mean, that's the way you get things done. So get those bright colored T-shirts and show up, right? And you all did a great job doing that. So I know you did. That was terrific. So do that. So stay involved that way. Now, as things evolved, and we've changed the way we operate as far as a staffing position and the type of property we own, we're able to use systems and fine-tune our systems. You know, if you own apartment buildings and duplexes and motels and different kinds of real estate, you can use similar paperwork, but really have different laws that affect some of that real estate. I mean, a commercial building is affected by a different section of tenant landlord law than a house is. So you have to understand how the laws are different. And the psychology of how you manage different types of tenants is totally different, isn't it? If you're running a motel, you treat the customer in a motel differently than you will a customer that you're going to have for 5 years, right? The way you negotiate with them. I mean, we checked into a motel in Orlando a couple of weeks ago and there was something wrong, and they said, well, we're very sorry. I said, that's all you got? And that's all they had. They're very sorry. And they're going to be very sorry for the next guy in. The next guy, they're not going to fix it, are they? They're just going to be sorry as long as they can. Well, you know, that'll work with a one-night guy. But it doesn't work if you're going to be there for a month or a year or 10 years. So it's a different way you treat people. If you have staff, and if you're going to have a big operation, you can talk to people in this room. There's some people in this room that have a lot of houses, and they manage them by themselves. They don't have staff. I mean, they have a lot of houses, 60, 100 houses, and manage them by themselves. You can do that if you have the right tenants. How many apartment tenants do you think you could manage by yourself? One, somebody said. Well, you know, you think 50 apartment tenants is a full-time job? You bet you it is. You bet you it is. Apartment tenants require, I'm saying this for the benefit of the people who are fairly new in this business, but apartment tenants require a lot more hand-holding than long-term tenants do, than a house tenant that might stay with you 3 to 5 years. And the biggest difference between an apartment tenant and a house tenant typically, now my daughter lives in New York City. She's been up here 4 years, and there are people who live in the same apartment in New York City for 30 or 40 years. It's a little different environment there. So I'm not talking about New York as much as I am where we live here in suburban United States. But in this town, an apartment tenant, if they stay 1 or 2 years, you're happy as the landlord. I mean, you're pretty happy to keep somebody a couple of years in an apartment building around here, because apartment tenants are what? They're young people. They don't have a bunch of stuff. They're moving on a lot of times. They just don't hang around very long. And that requires you to spend a lot more time working as a landlord. When do you have to go to work as a landlord? When people move out. When people move out. If somebody stays there, occasionally you have to go to work, don't you? You'll see in the book, I've got a sheet in there, and I keep track of all my tenant calls. Okay? I keep a list of them, and I keep a track of why they called, what we had to fix, and I also have a separate sheet on each property to keep track of what we have to fix, what we fixed on each property. So if I fix the same air conditioner 3 times in a year, you know, it pops back up pretty fast, I can see it. Since the first of the year, and this is June, isn't it? I've had 10 calls from tenants. Well, that's not bad, is it? How many months has it been since the first of the year? 5 months? That's 2 a month. Once every 2 weeks, I get a call from a tenant. Well, that's fairly manageable, isn't it? Can you run that without a full-time staff? Sure. Yeah, you should. And the answer is you should run that without a full-time staff, shouldn't you? You shouldn't hire somebody to answer the phone every 2 weeks. That doesn't make a lot of sense. That's pretty expensive phone answering, isn't it? So if you have an operation that has tenants that sort of self-manage, and that's the concept I'd like to teach you today, is how to buy the property and then how to attract the tenants that will, in effect, self-manage. You don't have to spend as much time looking after these people. So you have to start with that concept, and you have to say, okay, how do we attract people that aren't going to call us once a week or once a day and complain and need a lot of hand-holding? Now, even if you do everything right, is it possible that you get the wrong tenant occasionally? Sure. You can do everything right. You can be a really good landlord, and every once in a while somebody's going to sneak into your system, and that person will sneak in, and they just require a lot of attention. They're not bad people necessarily. Now, you know, once in a blue moon, somebody might do some damage to your property intentionally, but that's not typically the case. What happens sometimes, though, is you rent to somebody who just needs a lot of hand-holding. You know, they can't fix anything. They have a lot of questions. And so part of what you'll see today is my system for trying to take care of a lot of those issues before they move in, and trying to spot those people before they move in. Because if I see you as a high-maintenance person, I don't want to rent to you. If I see you as somebody that requires a lot, you know, that has a lot of questions, and how do you notice that before somebody moves in? Anybody ever spot somebody who was high maintenance before they moved in? What do you notice? What clued you off?
Volume of questions.
Volume of questions?
I married her.
We may leave that on a tape just so we can date this one, you know. Yeah. Well, there are high maintenance people out there, and if you rent to them, your life is going to, you're going to have to spend more time with them. So that's so simple, but it just makes sense, doesn't it? It just makes sense. So part of your job is to avoid high maintenance people. Now, we're going to talk a lot about attracting and screening and interviewing people today and go through all my paperwork and systems. So we'll do that. But if you have specific questions, and I'm going to be looking for a volunteer here because I'm going to ask somebody to come up here and let me do the interview with them. And I want somebody that doesn't know me well, somebody who's never seen my paperwork before, somebody who's never been one of my tenants, hopefully. So I want some honest response from whoever I use. So we'll look for a volunteer here at the first break. But if you do what I do, your life can be pretty good. I travel a lot. Valerie will tell you I don't work very much. I do go to work when we have empty houses. If I see a vacancy coming up, I do my best to be in town if I can and get it rented up as fast as I can, because an old-time landlord, and most of you know this, told me you can't get that vacant day back. Once you lose that day's rent, you can never get it back. Well, that'll make you nuts if you're not careful, but it is true, isn't it? So one of our keys to success here, and one way you get higher cash flow, and people have a hard time with this though, higher cash flow with houses than you do with apartments, because you have fewer vacant days. And if you look at an apartment building and you look at it honestly, and you look at the amount of vacancy they have, most of them don't run full, and should they? Anybody in the apartment business here, big time apartment business? If you had a couple hundred units and you were full, and you were paying somebody to rent them and they stayed full all the time, how would you think about that manager? The rents are too low. The rents are too low. Yeah. I sat next to a lady on a plane years ago, and she told me she'd never had a turnover. And I said, why? She said, I never raised the rents. And she was a manager. It wasn't her building, and she was a manager, And I think she was married to Dennis. I'm not sure. But, okay, I won't pick on anybody anymore, I promise. But if you don't raise your rents in an apartment building, does that hurt you? How does that hurt you? Your apartment building doesn't go up in value, does it? Your apartment building is worth what it produces. And if you never raise your rents, and now you go to sell it, and you hear this all the time when you go to buy an apartment building, what do realtors tell you all the time if you're trying to buy an apartment building? If you could buy it, what can you do? You can raise the rent. Well, what happens when you raise the rent on a whole bunch of people who haven't had a rent raise in 10 years? They all leave. They all leave. So you get to do a lot of work to raise that rent, don't you? But it's absolutely true that the value of that apartment building and the value of a duplex and the value of any kind of commercial building is determined by looking at how much income it produces, right? Okay? So if you don't ever raise your rents, you're hurting yourself. Now, you might say you can raise the rents and try to sell it for more, but as a practical matter, you have a hard time selling that thing for what it's worth unless you're getting top dollar rents for it. Houses are different. If you don't ever raise your rent on a house, now, are you giving up money if you never raise the rent? Sure, you're giving up the rent increases, but will it affect the value of the house? Probably not. Probably not, because most people, everybody I sell a house to is a user. They're not buying it for an investment. I never sell a house to another investor. I always sell it to an owner-occupant user. And why are they buying a house? Because they like it. They like it. You probably heard this story, but I was on a cell phone. I love cell phones. A couple of years ago with this guy, and he was looking at this house, and I heard his wife in the background say, I love this house. Don't you love that? And he said, did you hear that? I said, I did. And they've been in that house ever since, and we've raised the rent every year because I know she likes that house and she's not moving. Okay? Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? So cell phones are good technology. But if you never raise the rent in a house, the house is still going to make you money. It's foolish not to raise your rents, and I'll talk about rent raises. I think you should raise your rent pretty much every year, unless, of course, they're going down. Then you stop raising them. But so you use common sense, you stay tuned in, and I look at certain ratios in my town on a regular basis. And I went back just for the fun and listened to the two courses I recorded before, which are years ago now. But people complain about different things at different points of the cycle. And last time I taught this class, people were complaining because the prices they had to pay for houses were so high and the rents were so low. Things changed, didn't they? They changed. Will things change again over the next 10 years? Yes. It probably will. It probably won't stay the same. And so there's big cycles in these things. And the thing that I like most about this last cycle is prices dropped off dramatically in a lot of areas. But what happened to rents? They were stable. Now they dropped some. I mean, I had vacancies. I can go back to June of 2009, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and I can see that on June 1st, or June 2nd that year, we had 7 people that hadn't paid the rent. That's pretty dramatic in my portfolio to have 7 people that didn't pay the rent on time. They all paid this month. Everybody paid the rent on time. So there was a difference in the economy, wasn't there? Things were softer. People were struggling. They were having a hard time raising the money to pay rent. So there will be cycles here, and rents go up, and they don't go up in a straight line, but they go up in a straighter line than prices do. Because prices have this up and down thing going on sometimes, or they get flat for long periods of time, and rents tend to creep up. And if you're smart, and if you're a landlord, you will creep your rents up. You won't jump them up $200 at a time. You'll creep them up a little bit at a time, because by doing that, you won't lose your good tenants. You know, people aren't going to move for a small increase, but they will move. You take a good tenant and bump the rent $200 a month, they'll probably move on you. So you don't want to get somebody that far behind. You want to keep creeping them up. So that's kind of the overview of our program. This landlording course kind of fits together with my other courses. If you haven't read my book, Building Wealth One House at a Time, read that book, because that gives you the big picture. That gives you the overview of why I buy houses, which houses we buy, how we buy them, how we finance them, and it gives you the big picture. And of course, I teach that course once a year here in Florida. It'll be here in Sarasota next January. So if you want to come to that class, that'll be your next shot. You'll see in your table of contents there what we're going to cover today, and I guarantee you we'll cover it all. There's a lot to cover. I won't guarantee you what time we'll start and stop. I mean, I tell you when our breaks are going to be, and I intend to finish by 5 o'clock, but you never know. In a class like this, it's a one-time class, depends on how many questions we get, and I'll stay as long as it takes. And if you have questions of a personal nature, I'm happy to talk to you during the breaks or during lunch or after the class. So feel free to come up to me and ask me questions about it. You should set a goal, I think, of trying to be the best landlord in your town. And the way you define being the best landlord in your town is having the best tenants in your town. Okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about this morning about defining what a good tenant looks like and what a good tenant wants and how you can attract them. And we'll get to that in just a second. Again, a little bit of an overview. I kind of pattern my operation, my business operation, after my local bankers. I've always admired bankers for the hours they work. You know any bankers that are overworked? Not around here. You know, they go in between 9 and 10, they get off between 3 and 4. I say, I like those hours, you know, I like those bankers' hours. And can you get them at night if you need to borrow some money in a hurry? If your check is bouncing, can you call them at 8 o'clock and stop that? No, they work hours, don't they? They work hours. And I like that model, because I'm basically a lazy guy, I guess. And the other thing I don't like, and you hear this all the time from people who don't know much about the landlording business, they say, I'll never get in a landlording business because your tenants call you all the time and make you come over in the middle of the night and fix stuff. Now, how many people here have that on your goal sheet? Get up in the middle of the night and go fix something in a rental house. I've never done that in my life. I never get up in the middle of the night. They don't have my phone that they can call in the middle of the night. I have a button on my phone that'll turn it off. You have one of those? If you turn that phone off, you can sleep all night long and it won't ring, right? And you get up in the morning. Now, if there is an emergency, we'll talk about emergencies, but if the house burns down at 2 o'clock in the morning, do you really want to get up and go over there and watch the fire? No. I mean, maybe a couple of you, but most of you don't want to do it. You'd rather not hear about that probably till about 10 o'clock when you wake up, you know. You want to get a good night's sleep and then deal with it. Most emergencies are like that. There's not much you can do about an emergency. So we'll talk, you have to deal with them. You need to have some kind of system. You just can't ignore stuff like that. But you should think through, and here's the key to having good tenant relations, think through how you're going to respond before those things happen. So we'll talk about emergencies and how to deal with them today. But if you have a plan, some people just dread getting a phone call from a tenant because they think it's always going to be bad news. Well, it's only bad news if you let it be bad news. Tenants do have problems. Their air conditioners stop working, their plumbing plugs up. But if you know what your response is going to be to that call before you take the call, then it's not bad. You have a response. And it's a negotiation. Every call you take from a tenant is a negotiation, isn't it? Every call. There's hardly ever happy birthday calls from tenants, right? You don't get those. It's always a negotiation of some kind. So you need to be ready for that. You need to have your negotiator's cap on. You need to be set. And I love cell phones, and I love the technology we have today. I love email, because people will send me an email or leave me a message on my cell phone and tell me what the problem is. Well, if they tell me what the problem is, I get a chance to think about it, don't I? How I want to respond, and I get a chance to think about who I want to respond. I might even call the guy who's going to respond, so I can call my tenant back and say, George will be over there and fix it in an hour. So you can do a lot of things if you have a chance to think about it. In the old days where you just answered the phone and there they were, that wasn't as good, because now you had to be really good at negotiating, and you could get caught off guard. Anybody here ever been out negotiated by anybody? Only 3 or 4 honest people in a room. Yeah, we all have been out negotiated by people, haven't we? And they sneak up on you sometimes. They don't look like they're good negotiators sometimes, So tenants can do that, but if you can slow down the response a little bit and think about how you're going to respond and what you're going to do, it'll save you a lot of money. So the combination of these things, the combination of buying property that attracts people that'll stay for a long period of time so you don't have a lot of vacant days, and a combination of keeping your maintenance low because you don't have this turnover on a regular basis, and a combination of thinking before you respond to a tenant, so they don't talk you out of $50 a month or $100 a month or $500 a month or whatever they're going to try to talk you out of before you talk to them. All this adds up to a lot of money. This is not a small change we're talking about. If you have a bunch of property, this can be thousands of dollars a month. So it's a serious business, and the better you get at it, the more cash flow you're going to have. And that's what it comes down to. You talk to people at the breaks, and you talk to people at lunch, and you find the people that are smiling in this room, and the people that are smiling have management under control. They've got a system that works for them. They're not worried about somebody calling them. Somebody calls them, they're not worried. It's not a bad day if somebody calls them. So get to know some of those people during the breaks and during lunch, and stay in touch with them. You can learn from them as well as learn from me, and learn as much as you can about this. We had a guy take this class last time I taught, and he came from Singapore. Anybody know where Singapore is? If you go out here in a parking lot and you drill straight down and come out the other side, you'll be in Singapore. We got that on Google Earth. You go straight through. That's how far apart it is from here. Singapore. I had a guy call me last week. He said, are you going to come to Orlando anytime? I said, I don't think so. He said, well, when you come to Orlando, call me. I'll come to your seminar. I said, I'll be in Singapore. I didn't say that. I thought that, though, I said, if somebody will come from Singapore to get information, is that information valuable to them? Yeah, it is. It's somehow it's making them money. And they, so people come a long way. I remember the first class I took. I took it out of town. I took it in Houston, Texas, and I was really aggravated. I had to go all the way to Houston, and I was really aggravated. It was a $20 cab ride from the airport to the hotel. Because what could these guys possibly teach me? And I figured out what they could teach me. They knew a lot more about real estate than I did, and it was the best money I ever spent probably. It got me out of town. It changed my mind. I realized that no matter how far you had to go, if you can learn a couple ideas that'll improve your business model dramatically, it's worth going around the world for that, isn't it? So we have it easy. Many of us get lazy because we can go 20 miles away or 50 miles away and hear a good speaker, and that's a great thing. But don't be afraid of going across town. In fact, I'm teaching a class in Wasilla, Alaska, if anybody wants to come in 2 weeks. So yeah, we'll be on her lake. We may see her, who knows? Yeah, you can see Russia from the balance of the hotel. I still manage for a couple reasons. Number one, I'm a control freak. Anybody relate to that? Anybody in real estate because you like the control you get instead of what you get over in a stock market, which is absolutely no control at all? So I'm a control freak. I like being in charge. I like seeing where my money is. I like being able to talk to tenants. I like being able to talk to the repair people. I like to be able to negotiate all these things because I know it's my money and I know I'll do a good job. So the second reason is I'm very efficient at it. It doesn't cost me much to work, right? If I work an extra hour, I don't pay myself. So I'm happy to spend that extra hour making sure everything's going smoothly. So it's a very efficient system. If I hire somebody else to manage, and I'm going to talk about hiring somebody later in this class, do you think I lose some efficiency? Yeah. You think you can hire somebody that'll do the job as well as you will? No. Hard to, isn't it? Hard to, because you'll do it right now. You'll stop what you're doing. You'll do it right now, and you'll probably do it better. And the most important things you do, okay, when I first started, I did like a lot of landlords would. I mowed the grass, I painted, I fixed things. But those aren't the most important things you do. And those jobs don't pay all that well, do they? Because you can hire somebody to mow the grass, can't you? And you can hire somebody to paint and fix things. And if you're like me, those people will probably do a better job painting and fixing things. I'm pretty good at mowing grass, but as far as painting and fixing things, not so good. So I can hire that work done. It costs me money to hire it done, but I can get it done better by paying somebody else than doing it myself. And that frees me up. And if I develop the skills to do something else, then I can make more money, can't I? Now, if I just sit home and watch television, it costs me money. But if I take that same time and I go out and do something productive with it, like buy a piece of real estate or refinance a piece of real estate or raise somebody's rents or find a good tenant and rent to them, then I'm getting paid for a different skill set. And that skill set is called negotiation. So we'll talk about negotiating with tenants today, but that's a very important skill set to have. And then the last thing about managing your own property is it's safer, isn't it? You're probably not going to borrow from yourself. You know, anybody's ever embezzled money, just borrowed it. They never embezzled. They were going to pay it back, right? But you're probably not going to do that from yourself. So, and if you do, who cares, right? But if somebody else borrows from you, and if anybody ever heard of somebody having an employee who walked off with some money, or bad things happen to remote managers, I talk to people all the time that own property all over the country. In fact, there's a big deal going on now where they'll sell you groups of houses. You can buy 10 houses, one in each, 10 different states. They won't even be all in the same state. You can buy one in Ohio, one in Florida, one in Louisiana, one in Texas. I said, that's really an interesting plan. I talked to some guy, and he was going to go out. He hadn't seen them. He bought those 10 houses. He hadn't seen them yet. So his vacation was going to be able to drive around and look at those 10 houses. I said, boy, what a vacation. What a rough week when you get to Cleveland and try to find your house. And then you go to Pittsburgh, try to find your house over there. Then you go to Louisville, try to find your house over there. All these houses are going to look a lot alike, aren't they? Can you count on that? I think all of them probably need a paint job, just guessing. One of my favorite real estate stories of all time, I got to tell this. My friend Warren Harding, who's been dead for a while, but Warren was one of my mentors. And Warren owned this 40 acres in Texas. And he talked about it for years. He actually had traded it to a couple different people and got it back a couple times. And he just wanted to see this 40 acres in Texas. So he flew out to this town where it was. He went to the tax assessor's office. He walked inside and he says, I own this 40 acres. Can you tell me where it is so I can go see it? And the guy said, walk right outside the door, go down the end of the street where you don't see anything, and just look straight out. And he said, will that be my 40 acres? He said, no, but that's what it's going to look like. Isn't that a great story? That's a great story. Well, that's what this guy's houses are going to look like too, right? He can go look at one junky house in his town, and all 10 of those houses are going to look just like that junky house in his town. Why would you go buy 10 junky houses in 10 different towns? How in the world are you going to manage that? How could you ever get any leverage on a manager to manage one junky house 1,000 miles from your town? It makes no sense at all to me, but people do that. So if you ever have this urge to buy things out of town, just hit yourself with a hammer for a while, and when you stop, it won't hurt so much, and then finally that pain will go away. But if you buy something far, far away, you may have it for years, right? Hard to get rid of that stuff. And I speak from experience. On the page it says introduction. It says you can become a better landlord and have more cash flow and more stress in your life. So that's the goal here. More cash flow, less stress in your life. Those two things are good, right? And they're doable. They're doable. You can live a long, happy life being a landlord. Now, that's not your common perception of the landlording business. Most people have this perception where people are always adversarial positions with their tenants. They're fighting with their tenants all the time. They're working all the time. But it's just not true if you do it right. If you do it well, get good tenants, good houses, get them to self-manage, you can have an awful good life and do anything you want to do. And these houses will pretty much take care of themselves. So I say here there's 4 ways to accumulate $1 million buying property. Only 4. I wrote them all down for you so you have them. Buy $1 million worth of property with $1 million in debt and hold on to it till your tenants pay off the debt. That's simple enough, right? That was Jack Miller's old plan. He said just buy $1 million and pay it back. That makes sense. And it does if you get your tenants to pay it back. Can you do that today? Can you buy real estate that'll produce enough income to reduce its debt over a fairly short period of time? How long does it take to pay off a 30-year loan? It takes about 15 minutes. You just write a check, right? It doesn't take 30 years. It takes 30 years if you write the same check every month for 30 years. But as a practical matter, what will happen over 30 years if you own a house for 30 years? Money will change, won't it? It may appreciate, but I bet you one thing I think you can count on over the next 30 years is the dollar will be worth less 30 years from now than it is today. Anybody want to bet against that? If you want to bet against that, bury your money under your bed and see what it's worth in 30 years, right? That'd be betting against it. But I think it's going to be worth less because isn't it worth less today than it was 30 years ago? Yeah, a lot less. So what that means to you as an investor in real estate and as a landlord, and is if you hold on to a property, because the dollar is becoming worth less, and if you're fortunate enough to live in a town that's growing in population, that's becoming more popular and people are moving into your town, how does that affect real estate? That affects prices, doesn't it? It affects prices and affects rents because it puts more pressure on the market. And as they build new properties, can they build new properties cheaper than they could 20 or 30 years ago? No, they don't. Well, they may build a smaller house, but if you look at the cost per square foot of the land and the real estate, do you think it's going to get cheaper to develop land and build houses over the next 30 years? I don't think so. Because the more people that move to a town, the more the government tends to get involved in what you can build and how you can build it. And that makes the house more expensive, right? I've been building houses for Habitat and nonprofits for a long, long time, 30 plus years. And I've seen how we've had to change the way we build these houses. Now, the good news is you can't blow them away. I mean, they're almost hurricane proof because they're really well built. But the bad news is they're a lot more expensive to build than they were 20 or 30 years ago because the government has required us to do different things. And of course, they require everybody to do different things. And so they keep passing laws that make it more expensive to develop new property. Well, that pushes up the prices of the existing property. But I think as I look at the big picture, and I look at what's really happened over the last 30 or 40 years, most of the changes in the amount of rent that I collect and most of the changes in the prices that I've seen have not come as much from demand and supply as it's come from just the dollar going down in value. Okay? Now, what is another gauge of what the dollar is worth other than real estate? Any other thing you can look at that changes in price that gives you some idea what the dollar is worth? Gold. Gold. Has the price of gold changed over the last 30 years? Yeah, and it doesn't do the same thing. And I'm not saying it's a perfect indicator, but it has some relationship to the value of the dollar, doesn't it? So as you see the price of gold going right up, and other things like we use every day, like gasoline, changed pretty dramatically. And if you see these commodities change in prices, some of it's demand and supply, but a lot of it's just the value of the dollar. The dollar itself, because our currency doesn't stand alone. It is based on the value of currencies all around the world. And I'm not going to get into currency speculation. I've got you may be in the room, maybe not. Never mind. I'm not even going to go there. Different subject, different seminar. Number 2, buy $1 million worth of property and hold on to it till it doubles in price. Not value necessarily, but price. And this goes again back to the value of the dollar going down. If you buy a house for $150,000 a day, at some point during your lifetime, it'll probably be worth twice that much. And I don't know if that'll take you 5 years, because I've seen it happen in 5 years. I've seen it happen in 15 years. Depends on what's going on in the economy, doesn't it? And we really don't have much control over what's going on in the economy. Who's in charge of the economy? Nobody, I think, right? Same guy is in charge of the weather, I think. And they're about as good as predicting one as the other, aren't they? I mean, they're really good to figure out what's going to happen next year, and they're always wrong. But so you don't have any control there. But what you do have control over is the amount of assets that you buy and how you finance them and your plan for holding on to them. And if you can finance them so you can hold on to them and generate enough rent to hold on to them for 20 or 30 years, they'll almost certainly double in price during that period of time. Number 3, buy $1 million worth of property, $1 million below the market. Is that possible to do? Yeah, but you have to buy something pretty big, don't you? I mean, if you just bought one house $1 million below the market, it'd probably have to be at least a $2 million house, wouldn't it? But if you bought a $2 million house for $1 million, that'd be $1 million below the market. What would you do next? Good luck selling it, right? Yeah, it's hard to rent, so just buying one wouldn't make a whole bunch of sense. But what else could you buy $1 million below the market? Instead of buying one house, what could you buy? You could buy 2 houses, or 5 houses, or 10 houses. If you bought 10 or 15 houses, now it's a lot more work than buying one, but you have something you can rent, don't you? Because there's smaller numbers. Now you're buying houses that are worth maybe $100,000 or even less. And if you'll do that, and get good at buying, you can buy things below the market. We've got a contract to buy a house right now. I don't want to jinx myself, but it's way below the market. And it's supposed to close in a couple of weeks. And so now the market's pretty good for buying. If you time your buying a little bit and get in a market when it's a good time to buy, you can often buy 20, 30, 40% below the market if you have the knowledge and the ability. And number 4, buy and collect $1 million in net rent. How many houses would you have to collect $1 million in net rent? That'd be a lot. I've got a good friend whose goal is to buy 30 houses. He wants to collect rent one day a month. He wants that $1,000 coming in every day. So if you had 30 houses, they're all renting for $1,000 a month, and there are 30 days in that month, you get $1,000 a day, wouldn't you? Well, that's a pretty interesting way to look at set goals, isn't it? But you know, we all set goals differently. We all have a fairly simplistic approach to setting goals. But if you have a goal of generating a certain amount of income, I've gone back and tracked all my houses and looked at the income they produce, the stuff I've owned for years and years and years, and compared it to how much they've gone up in value. And in every case except two waterfront houses I've had for a long time, everything off the water, I've collected more rent than I've had appreciation. The net rent's higher. So the cash flow is significant, isn't it? And if you get these houses paid off and you don't have any debt on them, the cash flow can be very significant. So owning 30 free and clear houses, would that be a lot of money? It'd be a lot of money. That'd be a good goal to have, wouldn't it? Now, that's not easy. That takes a lot of work to own 30 free and clear houses, but there's people in this room that have done that. So it's possible, and you can do it in a lifetime, and you don't have to be, you know, look at what Warren Buffett has done in one lifetime. Isn't that amazing? I mean, and it's real money, isn't it? So, I mean, you can see that there's some fantastic things you can do in a lifetime if you set a goal to do it and develop the skills to do these things. Of the 4 ways to collect $1 million, 3 of them require you to be a good manager. Now, you can buy something $1 million below the market and sell it in theory, but that would be a challenge, wouldn't it? We need an empty chair? Who's got an empty chair? There's one here. Very good, thanks. That would be a challenge to buy something $1 million below the market. But, and here's a point that I like. It's not that important that you buy things way below the market when you buy them. What is important? What is important is the cash flow that house produces, that you can afford to hold on to that house for the next 10 or 15 years and see what's going to happen to it, okay? And if you have amortizing loans, and most of us have amortizing loans on a bunch of our properties, you ever look at how much your loans are paying down on a monthly basis? Does that make you feel good? It doesn't make you feel good, doesn't it? Because sometimes you say, I didn't make any money this month, but it's sort of like, anybody have one of those jars in your closet like me? I shouldn't even talk about this on tape, where you put all your nickels and dimes and quarters in. Yeah, well, we all do that. So at the end of the day, if you put 40 cents in there, you say, well, it was a bad day, but I made 40 cents, right? I'm 40 cents ahead, because you spent $3 to get that 40 cents, but you feel like you put something in the bank. Well, the amortization is a little bit like that, isn't it? It's hard to get rich off of amortization, but if you have long-term loans, and as you increase your rents, you think about how I can leverage that money to pay off my debt. We found that you can pay off most of these loans in 11 or 12 years. Even a 30-year loan, you can pay off in 11 or 12 years if you take the extra cash flow that property is producing and use it to buy more property, okay? Because now you're going to end up with more property than you need, and you end up selling some of that and pay off some of your debt. That's much more efficient than paying down your debt a little bit at a time. Unless you become a smart and efficient manager, you won't hold property long enough to collect this $4 million. Now, if you want all $4 million, what do you have to do? All 4 things, right? You have to learn how to buy things below the market, hold on to it, pay off your debt, keep the cash flow. But unless you're a good manager and buy property that you like to manage, you tell your kids they should get a job they like, right? Anybody ever done that and found out that was a mistake? Well, you should buy property that you like to manage, and that's not a mistake. If you buy property that you hate to manage, what will happen eventually? You'll dump it. You'll have a bad day and you'll give it away, and you may not make any money, you may lose money on it. Now, I won't ask for a show of hands here, but I bet there's at least 1 or 2 people in this room that have sold property at a loss. Yeah, there's me, because we didn't want it anymore. It was bad to manage. It was the wrong property. You know, you bought it and you made a mistake and you admit it, so you sell it and you take the loss. Well, you don't want to do that every time. See, there's no volume discount here. You want to buy property that you like to manage, the people that live in there you like on a regular basis. That way you'll hold on to it for a long time and you'll get these other benefits. Becoming a better landlord helps you today in some very practical ways. It allows you to work fewer hours and never work nights and weekends. You know, if I've had 10 phone calls in 5 months, how many hours is that? That's not a lot of hours, is it? How many hours does it take to manage 10 phone calls, talk to the tenants, hire the repair guy, send them out, get it done? That may be 20 or 30 hours. Well, that's pretty low hours, pretty low hours. So and I haven't had a turnover in that 5 months. I haven't rented a house in 5 months. Well, because of that, I've had very little work to do. Very little work to do. So if you can build your system around low turnover and buy a property that has low turnover, you won't spend a lot of time doing this. Becoming a better landlord produces more cash flow because you'll have fewer tenants, fewer vacancies, and fewer repairs. I've already said that, I think. And because you have cash flow, how does that affect your life? What can you do differently than somebody that has no cash flow at all? You can have a good time, yeah, but I'm thinking from a business standpoint now. From a business standpoint, if you have a business that produces cash flow, what does that give you the ability to do from a business standpoint? You can hire people and pay them sooner and negotiate better prices, can't you? So it's kind of a good cycle. I mean, if you're broke and you hire somebody to do some work for you and you can't pay them, what's going to happen the next time you call that person? If they show up, it'll be slow, won't it? They're not going to come back and do 2 jobs and not get paid, or get paid real slow like 90 days later. But if you can pay somebody right after they do the work, what can you do now? You can negotiate better prices and you get better service, don't you? Because they want to do work for you. You know, if I call you up and you're my plumber and you know if you fix something today that you'll get paid this week, you like me. That's a lot better than the guy they've got to chase 60 days for the money. And if you've never been in business, you don't realize how big a deal this collection thing is. Most people don't get paid on time, and they're chasing people for money all the time. So if you're a good cash customer and you have a cash flow business that allows you to do that, not only you get discounts or get good deals from people that do work for you, but you can buy stuff on sale, can't you? You can buy things cheap. You can buy things ahead of time sometimes. You can do preventative maintenance. Is preventative maintenance better than catching something after it's got a big problem? Yeah, it's cheaper, isn't it? Because you can do preventative maintenance many times with lower priced help. Okay, you don't have to have a high-priced contractor. You may not have to pull a permit. You may not have to do a lot of stuff. So having that cash flow that allows you to maintain your properties, and we'll talk about this as we get into it, I think. But I think this is, you can see a downward spiral in some people's operations where they just don't have any cash flow, so they don't maintain their houses. And when you don't maintain your houses, what happens to your tenants? They leave, and who do you rent to next time? Not as good a tenant, right? What happens to the neighborhood when you have this downward spiral in your house? It affects property values up and down that street. So you don't want to be that landlord. And can you spot that landlord if you drive up and down some of the streets in your town? Can you find a landlord who's in that downward spiral, who's not maintaining the property and got bad tenants? Well, is that a good property to buy? Might be. You know, if it's a good property in a good street, it's just bad management, it may be a great property to buy. We're trying to buy the property right next door to one of our houses that's in that position. You know, the poor guy who owns it's not a good manager, doesn't rent to the right people, it's just going downhill. And I know that, so I talk to him. And at the right time, we might be able to buy it. So, you know, another thing I learned from Warren Harding years ago is you don't have to go very far away from your town to find a good deal. And sometimes the really good deals are right next door to the properties you already own or right down the street from the properties you already own. So I'm out looking at the properties that I own on a pretty regular basis to make sure they're well maintained and everything looks normal about them. And while I'm doing that, what am I looking for? Opportunity. I'm looking for those landlords caught in that downward spiral, or I'm looking for an empty house or a foreclosure or just opportunity. So you're always doing that. And if you did your work right the first time, when you bought that first house, if you bought it on a good street and it attracted a good tenant, well, you want to own another house in that general area, don't you? You may not want to own a house right next door, but I've owned houses next door to each other and they haven't caused me a lot of trouble. But you may want to own more houses in that area if you know it's a good area. Number 3, becoming a better landlord allows you to buy more property. You know, the people that never learn how to manage, they get 3 or 4 or 5 tenants and that's all they can handle because they just never figure it out. But if you learn how to manage well and you buy property that attracts the right tenants, you can own 50 properties or 75 properties or 100 properties if you want to, and you can manage them yourself without staff. Those are pretty impressive numbers. That's a lot of leverage, isn't it? That's a lot of real estate to own 50 or 75 properties. And I'm not saying that you should do that. You know, my book says building wealth one house at a time. And I talk in that book about buying houses one house at a time. And I tell people that are getting started, buy one house a year. You know, don't go out and go crazy and buy 10 houses the first year, because if you do, you probably don't know what you're doing yet. And if you buy the wrong houses in the wrong neighborhood, you may buy stuff that's really hard to manage, and that's not good for you. So go slow when you're first getting started. But once you get good at this and you're a good manager, not only does that allow you to buy more property, but it allows you to buy property with higher leverage. Now, if you buy something with high leverage, what does that mean? It means you owe a lot of money against it, right? So what's your cash flow going to look like? When it's rented and nothing breaks, what kind of cash flow do you hope to have? Zero. Zero, right? When it's rented and nothing breaks. So don't you have to be a pretty good manager to pull that off? Yeah, because if you let it sit empty 2 or 3 months, you know, I had a student write a book called Nothing Down a long time ago, and the sequel, of course, is Nothing Left, okay? But if you buy properties with nothing down and you're not a good manager, how long will you own them? Not very long, because if you can't keep them full, you can't make the payments. I remember the first apartment building I bought. I bought it with nothing down. It was a 9-unit building. It was fairly new. It was in nice shape, but it had all bad tenants in there. And I had to change out the tenants, and I go over collecting the rent. I bought this property with nothing down. How much money do you think I had at the time? Not much. Okay? You know, it's funny, I go back and read things where you're supposed to have 6 months rent in the bank. I didn't have like 6 minutes rent in the bank, you know. If I didn't collect every one of those payments, I couldn't make my payments. You know, I couldn't make the taxes, insurance, the monthly payments unless I collected every one of them. Not 80%, 100%. Had to collect them all. And that was a mistake looking back at it, but I got to learn how to scramble, and I was younger, so I was happy to work hard to do it, and I pulled it off. But unless you're a good manager, if you buy something in high leverage, you probably won't make it. Okay? So learning how to manage before you buy with high leverage is important, but learning how to manage well allows you to buy with high leverage, and is that a good thing? Is it good to buy something with nothing down? It is. It's really good to buy something with high leverage in this business. It's a major advantage that we have, but everything's got to work, doesn't it? I mean, the terms on that loan have to be good. And you have to be a good manager, because if you don't collect the rents and don't make the payments, that nothing down will turn into nothing left. You know, it's a bad sequence there. Number 4, becoming a better landlord allows you to buy better property if you know how to attract the right tenant who will not damage your house. You know, I've taken courses, you probably have too, about people who say you build this bulletproof house so the tenants can't possibly damage it. You know, you make everything out of cement. I said, well, that's one way to go, you know, because now your strategy is you can rent to anybody in the world and they can't hurt your house. But that house is probably not going to go up in value as much as a normal house that looks pretty good, right? So if you're going to buy a normal house, and my strategy is, you know, if you've been around me for a while, is actually to buy a little bit better than a normal house. And I say normal, I mean a normal rental house. If most people in my town are buying a 900 square foot or 1,000 square foot or 1,100 square foot, 3-bedroom, 1-bath, or 3-bedroom, 2-bath with a carport or single-car garage, I tried to buy a little bit better house than that. I tried to buy a 3-bedroom, 2-bath with a double-car garage, a little nicer neighborhood, a little bigger square footage, but that house is more expensive, isn't it? I mean, the house itself is more expensive, the kitchen's more expensive, the bathrooms are more expensive, and if you're going to buy a better house, you better be better at selecting tenants, because now if you put the wrong people in there, they can do a lot of damage, can't they? I mean, they tear up a kitchen, that's expensive. So you have to be better at it. And if you're not going to learn how to manage, then you should go the other way, and you should build this bulletproof house that people can go in there with you just hose it out when they leave and it won't hurt anything, okay? So you can go that way. And if you're in the apartment business, probably not a bad strategy. It's kind of like, sounds like student housing to me. But on the other end, if you want to attract people that will stay in a house 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you probably need a little bit better house, and being a better manager allows you to buy that better house. Number 5, becoming a better landlord can increase the value of your property and the property around you. Well, that's important, isn't it? You want your house to continue to look good. And back when I had people working for me, my rule was, because I have a hard time finding some of my houses, I said, if I can drive down the street and find my house, that's a bad sign, right? Because I want my house to look just like every other house on that street, or even better. I mean, if it pops out at me because it looks good, that's okay. But if I can notice my house because the front door needs painting, or the roof is bad, or the bushes are overgrown, or somebody's parked in the front yard, that's bad, isn't it? That's bad. So I want to do a good job managing so my houses look like all the owner-occupied houses on that street. And when I buy a house, I like to buy on a street where there are a lot of owner-occupied houses. I don't want to buy on a street where there's 20 rentals and I'm just one of them, okay? Because what's that street going to look like? It'll probably look pretty rough, won't it? If you got, 2/3 of your houses are rented to somebody, won't that house street look pretty rough? That's not the street I want. I want the street where you can't see any rentals on it. Now, there may be rentals on that street, but one reason I teach this course and continue to teach people how to be better landlords is I want people in my town to be better landlords. I want people to take good care of their properties. If you buy a house right next to one of my houses, and you might do that one day, I want you to take good care of that. Because if you let your house run down, how does that affect me? It costs me money, doesn't it? It doesn't cost me like $50. It costs me $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 if you run that house down. So I want people to have this attitude and have the skill set to maintain their houses and select good houses. So look, as I said a second ago, look for opportunity to buy the houses run down and improve it if you can. Becoming a better landlord reduces your stress because you have fewer conflicts with your tenants. I can't remember the last time I had a battle with a tenant. Probably it's happened. But our dealings with our tenants are typically very civil. Okay, polite. I had a lady call this week, and she stopped up her plumbing. And she called and asked if I would unstop her plumbing. And I said, no, I won't do that. And it says in the agreement that we don't unstop plumbing. If you stop it up, you get to unstop it. She said, well, thank you very much. And she hung up. Well, I like that thank you very much part. And she actually said, thank you for calling me back. Well, that was very civil, wasn't it? I'm sure she wasn't happy to get that news, do you think? She'd much rather have me come out there and unplug her plumbing, but I wasn't going to do that. But she wasn't mad at me. She didn't jump up and down, yell, call me names or anything. So if you're into the right folks, you should have civil conversations with them. And civility is a wonderful thing, isn't it? Keeps your stress level down. You won't be chasing tenants to collect rent. People that collect rent are in a different business than I'm in. I don't collect it. People bring it to me. And why do they bring it to me? Because they want to continue living in the house. And if they don't bring it to me, they have to move, right? Now, there really is a line in the sand you can draw here between different kinds of tenants. When I was a kid, I used to work in restaurants, and I can always get a job. This is my financial fallback plan. If everything else fails, I can get a job washing pots and pans this afternoon. Because nobody likes to wash pots and pans, and I'm good at it, and I have to build for it. I can get down there in that bucket, and just wash those pots. It hurts your back after a while, but I'm pretty good at washing pots and pans. Well, if you wash pots and pans in a restaurant, who do you get to meet? The other dishwashers. That's the status you're on, right? And you work your way up. And I found something interesting about the restaurant business. If you wash pots and pans for 3 or 4 days, they'll promote you to running the dishwasher machine after that because you've showed up for 3 or 4 days. And if you'll do that for 3 or 4 days in a row and show up, they'll promote you to a cook. And if you do that for 3 or 4 days in a row, they'll make you assistant manager. So it's about a 2-week track to assistant manager. And you think that's funny? I bet you almost any restaurant in town that would work in, because you'll be the only guy who showed up 2 weeks in a row, right? And didn't miss like 3 days in there someplace. Getting people to come to work is a major problem for employers. True? Getting people to come to work reliably that'll do the job when they show up sober and do the job when they get there. That's hard. That's hard to do, and that's why it's really if you compare what we do to having a whole bunch of employees. If I had 70 employees instead of 70 tenants, would I have to work harder? You betcha. That would be a lot more work than I'm doing now, because my employees wouldn't self-manage, would they? See, the tenants will self-manage, so it's a whole different game. So what I was talking about, this line in the sand, and I won't split the room in half here, but on one side of that line are tenants who you have to chase for rent, okay? And tenants who are trying to beat you out of the rent, and tenants who are trying to talk you out of your money every time you talk to them. On the other side of that line are tenants who really like your house, and they want to stay in your house, and they think your house is a good deal, and they like you, and they think you're honest, and they think you're a good manager, and they want to keep you as a landlord. Can you see the difference between those two things? If you rent to tenants that you have to chase for rents, and they're always trying to beat you out of something, that's a hard life. That's a lot of work. But if you're renting to people who value your house, and they thank you when you call them, and they thank you when they move in, and they take care of that house because they value that house and want to stay there for 4 or 5 years. It's a whole different type of management. So think about that, and think about, we're talking about type of properties you need to buy to get there, but just think about that concept. You won't evict as often. We've evicted 6 people. We filed an eviction, our 7th eviction, didn't have to evict them, they moved out. But we've evicted 6 people since 1970. That's a pretty small number, isn't it? That's well over 1,000 tenants. Well over 1,000 tenants. Very small number. Now, I won't tell you we only had 6 people that didn't pay the rent, because that would be not true. We've had a lot of people not pay the rent, but I'll talk to you about how to get people to move out without going through the eviction process. Because if you go through the full-blown eviction process, and I'm not going to talk about it now, but it costs you a bunch of money, takes a bunch of time, and is aggravating. So your game plan should include not evicting. And one of the ways you should measure your program is by how many evictions you have. How many people don't pay you on time, okay? How many people, how many units you have sitting empty. And every time Clyde calls me, he asks me that question. How many empties do you have? Well, I'm lucky. I don't have any now, but there were days where I had 13. Well, if you wake up one day and you have 13 empty houses, what's your job that day? You don't have to worry about what you're going to do that day, right? As a landlord, do you ever wake up in the morning and say, what am I going to do today? I do. I have that. But when I have 13 empty houses, that never pops into my head. I know exactly what I'm going to do that day. I'm going to go out and rent houses. You'll have nights and weekends free. We've covered that. You won't be intimidated by your tenants. I remember some of the first guys I rented to were pretty scary people. And I remember one particular event where I had words with some of my scary people, and they threatened to kill me and burn my house down. So I decided maybe I'd go to the police station on the way home. So I did. I drove to the police station on the way home, and they followed me, and I walked in. I was talking to the desk sergeant, and they came in right behind me. Wow. And I said, this is exciting stuff. This is like, real TV or something. and I was in. And I was a star. And the desk sergeant, fortunately, was not a very tall guy, and these guys were both bigger than me. They're both bigger. I'm 6'5", and these guys are about 6'8", 6'10", about 300 pounds apiece. So there's reason to be worried. And anyway, he read them a riot act because they jumped all over me, and they jumped all over him, which was a bad mistake because he had the gun, and it was his house. He was in a police station, and nothing bad happened. But here's the point: if you cross cultures, if you deal with people who are regularly in bar fights, or the way they like to solve things is with their fist or threatening people. And I don't know if these guys ever burned down anybody's houses or not, but they didn't bother them to threaten me, right? I said, what are you going to do to me? Put me in jail? Been in jail. That didn't scare them. Well, if you're dealing with folks that aren't afraid to go to jail, that's a whole different group, isn't it? That's a whole different group. And you should think about this. And if you're intimidated by your tenants, bad move, right? Bad plan, because now you will have a hard time collecting rent. You'll have a hard time having conversations with them. So where they live is important, but can you rent a really good house to bad tenants? Can you go out and buy $1 million house on the beach and rent it to a bunch of drug dealers? The answer is absolutely, absolutely. So it's not how much you pay for the house or where the house is so much, although that may have something to do with it. But the bad guys like to rent nice houses. so you have to be careful, and you have to be smart enough going in not to rent to the wrong folks. Now, that was early in my career. That was one of the first houses I bought, and I decided just to get rid of that house, which I did. And I sold it to some nice lady with nothing down. She bought a house from me with nothing down. And as far as I know, she still lives there, and that's a good thing. But it was not a good rental house, and I wasn't a good landlord at the time. You will win negotiation with your tenants. That negotiation starts with your first contact with the tenant. And your first contact is likely to be somebody calling to talk to you about a house that's for rent. That's a negotiation. So we're going to take you step by step through all the negotiation process. So you'll know by the end of the day, you'll have some confidence in how you can negotiate with a tenant and win, or at least recognize that you can't win. Okay? If somebody comes in your office, you won't be able to out-negotiate everybody, and you won't be able to rent everybody comes in your office. I've had a number of people stand up and walk out during the middle of my interview process, said, this is too tough for me. And I said, that's okay, because it's too tough. Let's find out now, not after you move in. So you don't want somebody to move in and then have a problem. That's a cheap eviction if they'll leave your office before they move into a house. We don't count those. That's not included in my 6. Tenants will become team players and work with you to keep their costs down, earning them discounts for paying rent early and taking care of minor maintenance items. We try to give people financial incentives, or we do give people financial incentives for taking care of their property. Okay? If you pay your rent on time, you get to pay a cheaper rent. If you don't call me for maintenance that month, you get to pay a cheaper rent. And I found that by giving people these financial incentives, first of all, I get fewer phone calls, which is good. And second of all, I get my rents paid on time, which is really good. Now, does that cost me a couple bucks? If I never gave anybody a discount, you think I'd probably collect more rent? Go like this just so I know you're listening. The answer is yes. If I never gave anybody a discount, I'd collect more rent, wouldn't I? On a gross basis, I'd have more income each month. What would it require me to do? More time. More time. Yes, ma'am.
Do you worry if you give an incentive for them not to call you for maintenance issues? Do you worry about not getting calls for maintenance issues that you should be?
I will deal with that. The question is that if you give people an incentive not to call you because of a maintenance item, what if they just don't fix it and they move out of the house 4 years later and it's unfixed? This system I'm going to talk to you about, and I'll talk to you about it in detail, the concept of giving somebody a discount for doing minor maintenance in their house has to be linked to a significant security deposit. So when they move out of the house, if they fail to do maintenance that they've agreed to do, if you have leaky faucets, you have torn screens, you have doorknobs that punch holes through walls, that kind of stuff, that you have enough of a security deposit to make those repairs, deduct it from the security deposit, and hopefully give them some back. Okay? But if you don't do that, if you don't have a significant security deposit, and people don't, they live there for, let's say somebody lived there 20 years and never fixed anything. 20 years. Now, how many people here have lived in a house for 20 years? A few of us, right? Have you ever fixed anything? Is there anything you've been putting off for 20 years? Guys, all the guys go, yeah. See, you can live with stuff for a long period of time. Now, it could be little stuff, right? I mean, you wouldn't live with a leaking pipe or a dripping faucet for 20 years, but there's probably things you would live with 20 years. A small cut in your screen, how long would you live with that? Long time, right? Bent screen, window that doesn't close just quite right. Anybody ever screw a window shut besides me? You know, you can't tell the fire marshal, that kind of stuff. But you know, there are things you can postpone for a long period of time, right? If you live in a house yourself. And one interesting thing about tenants, you know, a tenant will live in a house for 20 years, and I've had 20-year tenants, 20 years with the same carpet and the same paint. Now just think about the contrast between that operation and somebody that has a turnover every 2 years. You know, that would be 10 times you'd have to probably repaint that house, and maybe 4 or 5 times you'd have to replace the carpet. The carpet, you know, it doesn't wear out. What happens to it? It gets really dirty, and it gets dirty in traffic patterns, and if it's your dirt, it doesn't bother you so much. But if it's somebody else's dirt, if you move into a house and you can see the dirt on the carpet, well, that bothers you a lot, doesn't it? So if somebody lives in a house for 20 years and they get it dirty and there's marks on the walls and the screens are torn and all this little stuff that goes wrong and will go wrong over a 20-year period of time, when they move out, first of all, is a 20-year tenant pretty valuable to you? Yeah. Think about how many vacant days you've avoided in 20 years. I mean, just that number. Forget about maintenance, but if you just look at the vacancies you've avoided over a 20-year period of time, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in it. It's a lot of money. Could be $15,000 or $20,000. So when they do move out, and when I have long-term people move out, do you generally have to rehab the property? Yeah, you have to put new carpet, new paint, sometimes upgrade the kitchen. You do stuff to a property over a 20-year period of time. And I'll talk about different ways to do that. But and sometimes, if I've had a 20-year tenant, I had the longest lady that ever lived with me, 27 years. When she moved out, we did some significant work to her house, but you know, when she moved out, I gave her entire deposit back. I didn't even go look at the house. I just gave her deposit back. 27 years, close enough, you know. House had a 20-year mortgage and she paid it off. Yeah, I got 7 years of free rent. I mean, that's the best deal I could ever have in my life. I mean, you just can't replace that very often. So you don't get, my point is, you don't get real excited if you get long-term people and you rent to the right folks. Where it becomes a major issue is short-term people. 1 or 2 year people who don't fix things and there's a lot of damage when they move out. Now you have to protect yourself with a security deposit because now you're not very far ahead of them. And when I think about renting to people, this is not a sign I have in my office, But in my mind, if I don't see a tenant staying at least 2 or 3 years, I don't want to rent to them. I don't want to rent to a one-year person. I want somebody that has some long-term potential, because if I do that, I know I'm getting ahead of the game from the vacancy standpoint, and I can handle the maintenance issues. Maintenance is fairly predictable. Vacancy is not predictable. Vacancy is really up to you. You have a lot of control over your vacancy.
John,
Yes, sir.
would you rather wait another month to get that 2 or 3 year tenant than somebody wants it for 1 year?
Oh, absolutely. The question is, would I rather wait another month, or even 2 months, to get a 3 or 5 year tenant than than rent to somebody right away for 1 year? And the answer is yes. I do that all the time. It depends a lot on your market, but we'll talk about balancing rents and deposits. If you're having a hard time renting a house, you just have to lower the rent. You need to have your rents aggressively priced so you do get some activity. Because if you can expose your house to the public somehow and get it in good shape and have it priced right, you should always have tenants in your house. And if you're not getting any calls, it shouldn't take a month to have somebody if you're priced right. Yes, ma'am.
Does the contract say that they're going to stay for 3 years? Do you have a contract saying that?
I have a contract, but it doesn't say 3 years. No, it says they can move out anytime they want. Okay, and I'm going to get to that, but I won't select you unless I have this feeling that you're going to stay for 3 years, and I'll tell you how. I'll show you how we get there. I'll show you how we get there, and it's very intentional. It's not accidental. So down at the bottom of this page, it says the cash flow you collect from your properties may be the biggest part of your profit, and that's true on a lot of my properties. The cash flow I collect is far greater than the appreciation on these properties. Now, in addition to cash flow, if they had loans, the loans are paying off. So just the loan pay down and the cash flow, those two things are significant. If we get appreciation, that's a bonus. And the people that make mistakes in this business count only on the appreciation, and they don't look at this cash flow side. They don't look at the management side as hard. And if you'll look at the management side and the cash flow side first and really focus on that and make that work, then the appreciation is a bonus. And sure, we get appreciation sometimes. I mean, properties I bought for $30,000 back in the 70s were $300 today. So they have appreciated, and I expect them to appreciate again over the next 30 years. But that's not the main source of my profit. And of course, if I can't hold on to them for that 30 years, I don't get that, do I? Okay? I've had friends take me around and show me the properties they used to own. Well, the properties you used to own aren't going to make you any money. The only properties that ever going to make you any money is the properties that you hold on to, stuff you still own. So make sure that you buy stuff that you want to own for a long, long time, because it goes by. And becoming a better manager translates into a raise of hundreds of dollars a month for the rest of your life. This is serious money. You're not trying to increase your cash flow by $5 a year. If you can increase your cash flow by $100 or $200 or $300 a month forever, that's a lot of money, isn't it? So you should focus on doing that. Next couple pages, we're going to talk a little bit about laws that affect your money. We're just about to a break point here. But certainly the tenant and landlord law in your state, and the part that deals with residential tenancies, and sometimes they even break that down to single-family residential, you need to print that out, go home and print that out, and read it 2 or 3 times so you really understand it. For you folks from Florida, we have people here from all over the country, but people from Florida, I printed in the back of your book the current statute, 2011 statute, tenant and landlord statute. So if you've never seen it, don't read it now, they'll put you to sleep, but you'll have it as a reference. But you want to update this on a regular basis. About once a year you want to go on and make sure they haven't changed anything dramatically, because they do change. The legislature changed these laws. But you need to understand this law for a couple reasons. Number one, you don't want to be breaking a law, do you? Or if you do break it, you want to know what the consequences are. Okay? You might step across the line occasionally, but you know what the consequences are. And the consequences can be fairly severe for a landlord who unconscionably takes advantage of a tenant. So you don't want to do that. I mean, you could end up in jail. You could end up with some major civil action against you. So know the law. Not knowing the law is not a defense. So you need to know the law, number one. Number two, if you ever deal with an attorney on the other side, you'll find they have a tendency to embellish the law. They have a tendency to add a couple things here and there to make it sound better from their side, And so you should know that. And if you're ever talking to an attorney, say, I've got the law in front of me, tell me where you're reading so I can read along with you. And they're not reading, they're making it up on their end. They don't have it any place close to them, okay? So, they probably read it a couple times, they remember parts of it, but they're very bad about doing that, okay? So that's the second reason you want it. The third reason you want to know it is if you find some tenant that you're interviewing and they start quoting the law to you, is that a sign? Yeah. That's not a good sign. Not a good sign. And they will do that sometimes. You know, with this internet thing, I have an internet presence, as most of you know. And the funny thing is, to me, my tenants almost all Google me before they show up in my office, so they all know who I am. You know, they know I'm in this business. They know I'm a pro at what I do. And they rent from me anyway. They're not scared of me. They rent from me anyway. So can you Google your tenants? Are you doing that? You're checking them out on Facebook? We'll talk about that. But, you know, the way things are changing, people can find out an awful lot. Or at least they can find out what you want them to know. You know, you can put stuff on that page that's not true, right? Anybody ever done that? Not me, but I mean, there are people that just put interesting stuff up there, I think. So know your local landlord and tenant laws. Get a copy of it, read it. Next page, federal laws. Fair housing and civil rights laws. You can't discriminate. Now, you can be a discriminating landlord, which means you can be particular about the type of property you buy and the type of tenant you want, long-term, what kind of income, that kind of thing. But you can't discriminate for the wrong reasons. And so you need to understand that part of the law, and you shouldn't discriminate. You know, I rent to everybody. I don't care what religion you are. I certainly don't care what race you are, who you're married to. What I am concerned about is, do you work, how much money you have, how long you're going to stay, who's going to live in the house, what kind of pet you have. And these are all business reasons. And if you keep your head on straight about this, you can discriminate for business reasons. If somebody doesn't have any money, they don't have to move into your house. You know, that's not what the law says. So you just get your head on straight about this, and you talk to people straight, and you know, you get it right. You get it right. So if you don't know anything about those laws, I give you references here. You can read the entire body if you want to. If there's any, of course, income tax. We're not going to talk about that in this class, but the advantage of buying leveraged real estate, I'm always, I have conversations with my Democrat friends occasionally, and they complain about Republicans that don't pay any taxes. I said, I didn't pay any taxes for 25 years. Now, why didn't I pay any taxes for 25 years? I'm sort of like Mitt Romney, and I didn't pay any taxes for 25 years. Because I had a whole bunch of depreciation. I bought a whole bunch of property to leverage. You go out and buy 30 or 40 houses with nothing down, what's your tax bill going to look like? You're not going to have one. I mean, you'll have a tax return you've got to file, but you're going to have losses because you've got, if it just breaks even, what do you have on top? You still get all your depreciation. So, and if you're in the business, there's no limit to that depreciation. You can take a $500,000 in excess. You know, that can be a loss and offset other income. So if you're in the business and your goal is not to pay taxes, then you're in the right business, aren't you? Because you can arrange this business not to pay a whole bunch of taxes. Typically, you pay taxes when you do what? Sell. And capital gains rates are low enough now that even if you sell, it's not a big hit. But you get to choose when to pay taxes. Warren Buffett doesn't pay a lot of taxes. If I was Warren Buffett, I probably wouldn't pay any taxes at all. Do you think Warren Buffett can eat free any place he wants to go? Sure. So he doesn't have to pay much money for food, right? What do you really have to pay taxes on in this world? Income you use for what? Personal stuff. Okay? If it's business, you can deduct it, can't you? When I go to Wasilla to teach a seminar, I get to deduct my plane trip, don't I? It's a business expense because I've got to go to Wasilla to teach a seminar. Now, I'm going to get up there early just so I can adjust to the time. A couple weeks early, actually. And I'm going to well adjusted because I want to do a good job teaching this class in Wasilla. Well, if you're in business, and you should be in business, and if you're a manager, are you in business? Yeah, you're in business, okay? So, and you can separate this, and you can have a management business. You can have an LLC, or probably a subchapter S corporation, one of those two things, and operate a business that manages your property, and if you're a real estate broker, can manage other people's property. And if you're not a real estate broker, you could lease other people's property, and then sublet them. You can do that without a license. So you could come to me even if you don't have a real estate license, and you could rent 5 of my houses from me if you could convince me that you're a really good manager. And then you could sublet those 5 houses to somebody else and take a profit. You wouldn't need a real estate license to do that because you're operating as a principal, don't you? Aren't you? So you can do things in a business. Now, if you did that, if you have this business, this management business, you have a whole separate tax return. And you can use that tax return to deduct things that you can't deduct on your personal tax return. Okay? The personal tax return gets looked at. Now, a little tax advice, and I'm not a tax guy, but a little tax advice, don't file a Schedule C on your personal tax return. C like Charlie. File a Schedule E, E like Echo. And that's the schedule on your tax return where you list all your real estate and you list all the expenses on that real estate. And if you look at the Schedule E, it's got a whole list of things they want you to list. Starting with A, advertising, working all the way down, okay? And you can fill in those blanks. You have to keep track, you have to keep receipts, but you can allocate to your properties your expenses, okay? And that's a good thing to do. And if you'll do that, if you'll keep your receipts and keep track of the money you spend that's business related, and you deduct all those things, well, now none of those things are personal expenses anymore. They're all business deductions. So you don't have to have that kind of income. The only thing you really need income for is things you can't deduct. Personal expenses, maybe clothes, a car. Is there any way you could deduct a car if you're in the management business?
Yes.
Probably. Any way you can deduct your phone if you're in the management business? Probably. Internet connection on your computer, probably. So you can deduct a lot of stuff, can't you? But you can't deduct your clothes, probably, unless you wear a uniform. You can't deduct entertainment that's not business related. But you know, that can be a pretty small amount if you're Warren Buffett, because people are taking him out all the time. And what can Warren Buffett do every year that would allow him to live absolutely tax-free, never pay a dime in taxes? He could borrow his income. If he needed $100,000 a year, or $200,000 a year, or $1 million a year, or pick a number, to live on, couldn't he borrow it? Doesn't he have pretty good credit? You know, once you have lots of money and lots of assets, you have the ability to borrow money, don't you? And you just borrow it right. I've got a friend, I won't tell you his name, but his game plan is to sign that last mortgage the day before he goes, you know. He's not too worried about his kids. If his kids don't want it, tough. He just keeps refinancing everything he has and keeps pulling money out. He cranks it to the teeth all the time. Well, that borrowed money is what? Tax-free. Tax-free. And I'm not sure that's the right game plan. It's not a game plan I endorse. I own a bunch of free and clear stuff. But I would assume that it's not a bad, I'm not telling you it's a bad game plan, and I'm just saying if you really wanted to live a tax-free life, that's certainly one way to do it. Learn how to borrow.